welcome back, Broncos, to another episode of the Poly Podcast. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests. With me, I have the Vice President of the Poly Sci, the CBP Poly Sci Club. This is going to be Thomas Swanson.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, joining him and joining me is going to be the Secretary of the CBP Poly Sci Club, Emely Vanegas.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you guys so much for being here with us, especially on the eve of the election. It's going to be next Tuesday, so it's a lot going on. So I'm really appreciate you guys being here to give your perspective and your thoughts on the election.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, thank you guys for being here. So jumping right into it, I actually want to start off with just general election thoughts. Just briefly, how do you guys feel like the election cycle is going this time
around? Well, I guess I'll start. I feel that it is kind of a Democratic wave year. The fact that Trump is struggling in states like Texas is now rated by Cook Political Report as a top toss-up. The same with Georgia and Iowa. The fact that those very used to be ruby red states are now in play is just kind of a sign of that wave that could be coming. But we'll see how big that wave is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's been a lot of contention going around in typically Republican states, things you haven't seen before, very unprecedented, I believe. I feel like it's been a resurgence of like people actually thinking that they can like make a change and vote, going out to do that vote. So it's I think I'm very happy to see this change. Hopefully it is change for the better, but I guess we'll see come Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. And we will definitely get to Texas in particular and the various kind of toss-up states as well as turnout. But just real briefly before we actually move on to the different battleground states, I wanted to ask you guys, as two leadership members of the CPP Political Science Club, how do you feel like Cal Poly specifically and your club and your organization in general, how do you feel like that they have engaged with the election so far? Have you got a lot of influx of people coming out and reaching out to you guys? Have you seen a lot of mobilization, at least online, I guess, with COVID on campus? Like how has the engagement been with Cal Poly?
I mean, we've done our best to host events to kind of educate. We're all learning together in this election, so we've done the best to kind of provide opportunities for Broncos to learn more about ballot propositions, just the voting process in general, what you're voting for. I haven't seen a huge mobilization, but there's definitely, I would say, interest. One of the only kind of positives I'll give President Trump is he has engaged a lot of people in the political process. So it's really exciting to see people interested in talking about ballot propositions where that might be kind of boring in any other election cycle. But people are really engaged. And I think they're paying attention to not just who's going to be president next year, but all of the other offices and elected officials we're voting for, as well as laws we could pass through the propositions.
Yeah, and I think CPP has done a pretty good job in trying to mobilize voters. They're like a polling place now. Also, early voting opened, I believe, this past week. And then also our class representative, Alex, he's also like teamed up with Turbo Vote to kind of like get students, organized and like get registered to vote. And I think that's been a great, initiative that he's taken and that we've talked about as well. And yet at our own meetings, we've kind of tried to like talk about like these coming propositions. Like we don't try to tell people how to vote, but we just tell them like, this is what happens if you vote this way, or this is what happens if you vote that way, consider your options, look into it yourself, do the research.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and I think I agree. CPP has done definitely a good job of educating people. I know, especially at the Poly Post, we've tried our hardest to work with you guys and as well as Dr. Guerrero to try to help spread the word out. So, just speaking briefly on that, just real quick from the both of you, do you feel like turnout is going to be higher or lower this time around? Just given all the initiatives that CPP has taken to help raise it, do you think in general that's going to help with turnout?
Are you speaking specifically at CPP?
I would say both. So give your perspective on like how you think CPP's turnout is going to be, and then more broadly, just very briefly, if you want to mention like how do you think turnout in general is going to be this election?
I think, well, just in general, in this election, I think turnout is way up. We already surpassed all early voting, I think, a couple days ago. And I think those same trends are going to carry through CPP. with all of the opportunities. And we did have, not only did our club host a session to just, like Emily said, explain what a yes or a no vote means on a ballot measure. They had, I forget what it's called, Emily, help me if you remember. But it was, they brought in interest groups from both sides of each proposition. It was an election fair
Yeah.
for people to kind of figure out and test that out further to figure out their votes. But I think that the early voting we're seeing is a sign that it'll be a historic turnout, and I think that'll carry through CPP.
Yeah, I agree full-heartedly. I think, people are really starting to mobilize, and I think they're really starting to feel like, this election matters, their voices matter. Even if you're in California, even if you're in New York, or if you're in like, you know, Texas, if it was still like a solid red state, people are starting to see that yes, their voices matter. And that, it's not just about the presidential election, although that is, uh the main thing going on right now, but it's also about your local election, seeing how like your own state is going to implement policy, seeing like your own local representatives and if they're doing things in your best interest or in the best interest of the community. And so I think CPP in general, we might have a great turnout. And then also overall, I think it's been very optimistic. I feel pretty happy about the way people are like mobilizing to vote.
I agree. I think we're going to see some big numbers, like you alluded to. There's already been a huge amount of early turnout, so hopefully that trend continues across the country as we get closer to Tuesday. So you guys mentioned polls earlier, so let's go ahead and move on to that. So currently, Real Clear Politics, according to them, Vice President Joe Biden holds a 7-point lead over the president. And in the Electoral College, Biden is currently leading Trump, according to the polls, with 232 votes to Trump's 125 votes. And with these leads and with these polls, and when you saw with 2016, the polls don't always reflect reality. How do you feel that the vice president's chances against the president, or vice versa, how do you feel like that's going to turn out with the polls, given the data? Do you feel like things are radically different than 2016, and the polls are actually going to be spot on? How do you respond to like how the polling is currently trending?
Well, I think Real Clear Politics does a really good job, but using their own polling, New York Times and Siena College, they actually answered this question, I think, pretty well. They kind of, what the polling looks like this time around in 2020, they compared that to what it would look like if Trump outperforms like he did in 2014, or if a Democrat outperforms like Obama did in 2012. But even if Trump, if it played out exactly like 2016, Biden still is up by about 7 points. So I think it's pretty, his path to victory is very narrow. And I think that those polls are the fundamentals are gonna stay the same come November, come election day.
Personally, I think given, 2016, polls are good for kind of like guessing, like guesstimating, I guess, like who's going to be the victor. It doesn't guarantee it though. And I think we all learned that from 2016. No one really could have predicted the outcome. Well, myself personally, I could have not predicted that outcome. So I think my thing would be like, yes, the polls are very optimistic in Biden's chance of winning, but that doesn't mean that, you should feel complacent. You should still go out there and, still engage, still vote. Don't think, oh, Biden's got this in the bag, because you never really know.
Mhm. No, I agree. I was actually looking over the New York Times poll that you had mentioned, where they actually calculated out where comparisons to 2016 and 2012. So I think that is a really good resource for people to check out, just to kind of see like, okay, if things go in either direction, where we could possibly land. But like you said, I think the vice president has a pretty solid lead right now, that no matter how it swings, this is in his court, at least for the time being. And I also agree with you, Emily, that polls are not the end all be all, obviously, and they're more of a room temperature check, just to feel like, okay, where are things kind of leaning, but it's by no means like a definitive kind of prediction. So let's move on then to the battleground states. I want to focus specifically on very important. These are the states that I feel like, just looking at all the data for this election, these are the states that I feel like are going to be the most important. And these are also 3 toss-up states. So that includes just like you guys have mentioned, Texas, which is now considered a toss-up, Pennsylvania, and Florida. So these are the top 3 remaining states with the most electoral college votes for either the vice president or the president to gain. And they're also toss-ups. So let's talk about those states. How do you feel like those 3 important states are going to go? Or do you even feel like they're important?
Well, they're definitely important. I think Pennsylvania is a must-win for Biden if he's going to be able to carry Michigan, Wisconsin, and even Minnesota could go for Trump if he fails to win Pennsylvania. But I think Florida is confusing because of kind of the demographic shifts and who's supporting which candidate. So you've seen Biden gain a lot of support with older voters, which were in Trump's camp last time around. But kind of Latinos in South Florida are moving towards Trump. So I don't know, I can't predict kind of how far those 2 groups will move in either direction, but it'll come down to whether Trump can make up for his losses in elderly support with those Latino voters in South Florida. And speaking to Texas, I really am not sure who's going to be able to win it. Biden has been struggling in Nevada, Texas, the Southwest, Georgia, Florida with Latino voters. And they were a big part of Beto's coalition in 2018, who came within a point of beating Senator Ted Cruz. So I'm really not sure what that means for Biden and whether or not he'll be able to pull off the win in Texas.
Yeah, speaking to Texas, like Thomas was saying, Beto, he kind of like shifted everything. He changed people's perception of like Texas being a solidly red state. No one could have predicted just how close that race would have come out. I mean, I remember, seeing the election results that night, and it was very astonishing to me. Given that, though, whether Biden can pull out a win from Texas, I feel if he gets Texas and, like Thomas mentioned, Pennsylvania, that's it. Game over. He gets it. Though I'm not sure how well or how certain that shift is going to be, whether Texas is going to become a blue state or, something closer to a blue state. That is still up to debate because despite all that, there's still a large number of conservatives in the state, so
Yeah.
it really just comes down to like, people and how they like mobilize and if they're mobilizing there. But I feel pretty optimistic given everything though.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to Texas, something interesting was in Beto, the 2018 race, is people had the option to select a party, and that would fill out the rest of the ballot. So a lot of people enthusiastic about voting for Beto O'Rourke filled out just put Democrat, or you can just vote Republican. But so many people chose just the Democratic option that carried state legislators, state senators, as well as judge positions who identified as a Democrat. But Texas, who has been notorious in voter suppression, has moved to eliminate that rule. So we'll see if Biden, even if he doesn't win Texas, the enthusiasm in that state could carry down ballot. Where Republicans only have, I think it's a 15-seat majority in the House, and I think around there in the state Senate as well. So their majorities are not locked in. So if enough voters turn out and kind of vote Democrat, not only for the presidential ticket, but also down ballot, you could see a real shift in the politics of Texas and the makeup of that state.
Definitely. I think that it's definitely going to be interesting to see how those 3 kind of key states swing. And like you said, the kind of ramifications of those potentially flipping in, Biden's favor or vice versa, remaining red for Trump in the case of Texas. So kind of speaking of senators, then let's move on to the senator races, because it's not just about the presidency. The November election is also about down ballot, like we keep mentioning. So currently the Republicans hold a majority in the Senate with 53 seats to the Democrats 45. Do you see there being a lot of flips for either direction? Do you see the Republicans gaining a stronger majority, or do you see Democrats retaking the Senate?
Personally, I feel very optimistic, like I've mentioned before. I mean, who knows if this optimism will last come Tuesday. But I think in order for things to finally start heading in like I don't want to say a more right direction, but, in a direction that I feel is more in touch with, the actual citizens of the United States, I think the Democrats need to take the Senate. And that being said, I feel like races are starting to hit very close. You you see senators who are, typically very secure in their own positions, starting to really campaign because they know like a wave is coming. They feel it. And I think a lot of people, like I've mentioned before, and like Thomas has mentioned before, this blue wave is coming. And I think it's only, this is going to lead to like the Senate being flipped. Personally, that's what I think. I can't predict the future, but I do see like a big flip coming, and I think it needs to happen in order for, to secure, the future of the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we're on track to pick up, I think, about 4 seats, which is what we need to win an outright majority. But even if we only pick up 3, I think that with Senator Kamala Harris, if she was to win the vice presidency, she'd be able to be a tie-breaking vote.
Mm-hmm.
But Arizona is looking like it'll be a Democratic state. 2 Democratic senators, where only 6 years ago it voted for Romney, voted for McCain. We had 2 Republican senators in that state, so a very quick shift.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Collins looks poised to lose her seat in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And Lindsey Graham, it's a toss-up in South Carolina, which is a solidly Republican state, a very conservative, socially conservative state. So I think that North Carolina, Arizona, Maine, and what was the other one? That was kind of, Iowa is also a state that we could win. So, but the fact that Democrats in Alaska, Kansas, Montana have a third of 1 in 3 chance of winning, and those states that went for Trump by over 15 to 25 points is kind of astounding. But again, just to caution, because even if Democrats win a majority, if that majority is made up of senators who won in South Carolina, who won in Kansas, who won in Alaska, who won in Montana, probably it'll be interesting to see how that affects the legislation that's able to be passed, because if a lot of maybe more conservative Democratic senators are able to gatekeep all this legislation, it'll be interesting to see whether a public option can be passed, whether free college for those making less than $125,000 a year can actually pass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree. No, I think it's going to be definitely interesting seeing the makeup of the new Congress, or sorry, the Senate. When it's in session again after this election. Just like you said, if we get the type of Democrats, so let's say the Democrats do retake the Senate, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be a purely progressive or Democratic agenda, because depending on the demographics of those different senators, they might appeal to their constituencies, which may be in very red states, like you mentioned. And it's actually funny. I was going to bring up 4 races, and you mentioned 3 of them with Martha McSally and Mark Kelly in Arizona, South Carolina with Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison, North Carolina with Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham, and then Maine with Susan Collins and Sarah Gideon. So you've already mentioned 3 of them. Just briefly, and if you want to give me your thoughts on how you think that North Carolina with Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham is going to swing.
It looks like Cal Cunningham is going to pull off a win. He did have a sex scandal where he did have an affair, but it hasn't, in the polling, it hasn't actually made an impact from what I've seen. So I think that we'll be able to carry that seat as well. But we do look ready to lose Alabama, where Doug Jones is trailing by about 10 to 15 points behind the candidate there. So I think we're poised to win all of those seats. And one of the key moments where Teresa Greenfield, the Democrat in Iowa, is pulling away from Joni Ernst is when this moment where they asked her, what is the price of soybeans in the state of Iowa? What are they selling for? And Joni Ernst couldn't answer that question.
Well, thank you very much. I might have missed it, but I don't think you answered my question. What's the break-even price for soybeans in Iowa? You grew up on a farm. You should know this.
I think you had asked about corn, and it depends on.
I asked her corn.
It depends on what the inputs are, but probably about $5.50.
Well, you're a couple dollars off, I think, here, because it's 10:05. So, well, we'll move on to something else then.
So a lot of times, these senators aren't doing well because either they're out of touch with the constituents that they claim to represent, or they've taken positions that are very extreme, like Susan Collins' support for Brett Kavanaugh, which maybe turned off and kind of ruined her record as a moderate, kind of bipartisan senator.
Yeah.
So a lot of these senators have tied themselves to Trump and his success. He doesn't look like he's going to succeed in this election, being reelected. So he seems to be poised to drag down a bunch of these senators.
Yeah, and I think that's just, how it goes. You align yourself with your party instead of, really listening to the voice of the people and what would be good for the people you're representing. And, this is just the price you pay.
Yeah,
A lot of these states are being ravaged by COVID-19. Iowa in particular has taken a huge hit in the price of soybeans and other goods, pork as well. So people are really feeling the impact of what it means for Donald Trump to govern. And I think they're going to make us another choice for who they would like to govern come 2021.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to say that I think that the COVID response is definitely going to play a huge impact in this election in terms of, like you said, those senators that have previously tied themselves with the Trump administration and how that's going to fare, whether or not people are going to ride or die for them. So figuratively, hopefully. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely going to be interesting how things shake out. Before we move on to the very last topic, just real quick, give me just a prediction. How many seats do you think are going to flip?
I'm leaning more towards the camp of 3. I would like to see the 4. But like I said, you never know how things are going to go. I think it would still be great if we did 3. If we did the 3, then that would be amazing. And then the 4 would be astronomically astounding. But that's just me personally.
I think we'll be able to pull off. I think we'll have a 1 or 2 seat majority after all the dust settles. So I think we'll pick up about 4 seats, but we'll lose Doug Jones' seat. But a very narrow majority, which we would need to consider the end of the filibuster if we're going to get anything done, if we are going to govern with a majority of 51, 52 senators.
Interesting. All right, then. And I know we're short on time, so the very last thing I want to talk about is the actual election predictions. How do you think that, I'm going to ask you 2 things. I'm going to ask you, 1, how do you think election night is going to go? Let's talk about that briefly. And then at the very, very end, I want to get you guys just straight calling it. Who do you think is going to pull this out in the end? Because obviously votes aren't going to be finished counting for a little bit after Tuesday. So focusing on election night, how do you think it's going to go down? Do you think that we're going to see a lead? Do you think the media is going to call it for anybody? How do you see it playing out?
Well, election night, yeah. Everyone, that's all I know a lot of people have on their mind. Personally, after speaking with Professor Scarcelli in the political science department, he himself is very concerned about how that's going to go. Trump might try to call a win early on. And if he does do that, there'll be pandemonium. But I think the way it's going to work, especially given that a lot of the blue states are mailing in their votes, is that you're going to see a lead for Trump. But then as things continue to play out for the rest of the night, that, you'll see that spike in blue votes for Biden, and you'll see that trend continue on into the following weeks. That's personally how I think it's going to go. That election night, we might not have a clear winner, but I do think that Biden might just pull something off at the end of that night.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Emily was saying. What's really frightening is what she described as if President Trump tries to claim victory, and then as votes are counted in the days or weeks to come, if it trends more towards Biden, what is going to be his response to that? Is he going to try to undermine a free and fair election? Coming from Washington State, elections take 2 weeks usually to count all of the ballots. So every day the results change. So we're used to that in Washington, but I'm concerned to see how the president is going to handle what could be kind of a red mirage on election night, but actually result in a Joe Biden win, maybe 6 or 7 days later.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a concern on a lot of people's minds on whether or not who is leading on election night. You know, maybe folks not realizing or living in states where they don't take a long time to count, even though like it's never actually like the media calling something doesn't actually translate to who won. It's always about just like projecting who's won. So definitely think it's going to be interesting and possibly concerning, depending on how much of a spike we see, if there is one, from like you said, all those early voting, votes coming in, and maybe shifting it dramatically after election night. So I think that's definitely a concern that could happen on election night. Do you think there's a possibility, real quick before we get to the final predictions, do you think there's a possibility can kind of swing in the other direction where it's really close, and we don't actually have anybody being called on election day?
That is a possibility. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
Sorry, no. I totally think that could be a possibility where we go to sleep without a winner in the Electoral College. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree full-heartedly. That's gonna be very heavy for people to take, but I think they need to prepare mentally and like emotionally for that kind of outcome.
All right, yeah, like I said, it's going to be an interesting Tuesday. I'll tell you that. We're all going to be watching eagerly to see what happens. So the very last thing before I let you two go is just calling it right now. After it's all said and done, the dust finally settles. Who do you think takes us home?
Definitely Joe Biden and the Democrats in both the House and the Senate.
Okay. I agree full-heartedly. I think after given everything that has transpired within the last 4 years and even within the last few months, you have to really look at it and examine the policies or the lack of thereof of responses from the Trump administration and think, is this something that we're gonna deal with for another 4 years? Do we have the option to deal with it for another 4 years? Do we politically, socially, economically, and with climate change and everything, can we even handle another 4 years? And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that no, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna work.
Interesting. All right. I mean, these are bold predictions. You guys are saying 3 out of 3. You're saying they keep the House, they flip the Senate, and they take the presidency. So, bold predictions. But we're going to see how it plays out on Tuesday. I know you guys got to go, so I want to thank you so much yet again for joining us. Thank you so much for being on the program and giving your thoughts and perspective. We really appreciate you guys being on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Absolutely. And with that, Broncos, we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much again for spending time with me and Andy. I know this is the meaty episode. We're going to try to break it up for you guys, but hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you go out there and register to vote. Hopefully you bring your friends and family to join you. And with that, we're going to catch you on the next episode. Be sure to check out all those links. Follow me and Andy on Twitter, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.